Signal drift spiking at 63%. Routing through the tertiary buffer, or we're done transmitting in 90 seconds. Commander Rourke Vesh didn't answer. His gaze remained fixed on the fractured relay schematic stitched across the tactical board, nodes blinking in and out like dying neurons. Behind him, thick power conduits buzzed intermittently along the command node's steel-veined walls. Heat bleed from the underfloor systems made the entire chamber feel like it was exhaling against their boots. "Commander?" Valen asked again. Fingers splayed across a control matrix with two sensors already peeled open for direct override. His skin scaled and faintly blue under harsh panel light, glistened with stress-induced membrane flare. One of the colony's original systems engineers. Valen wasn't military, but he hadn't left since the declaration. Rourke Vesh finally spoke, low and final. "Cut the Alliance vector. Route through the relay buried under Annex 4. The old one." Valen's hands paused mid-magnet. "That was Scarvex Ops. It's dormant. Quarantine protocol. Unseal it. Strip out the safeguards. We're not calling the Accord anymore." He didn't wait for a reply. He turned, boots clinking against the durasteel grating, and made for the primary interface. Each step sent a jolt up his knees from the hardened floor, his body still aching from the blast tremor 2 days ago when the outer comms tower collapsed under atmospheric stress. That tower was the last high-band array they had. What remained were trench-level workaround systems, hardwired links buried a decade ago for the Scarvex colonial expansion that never materialized. Behind him, the comms room wasn't quiet. Data vents pulsed irregularly. Cooling pumps groaned under rerouted power loads. The filtered air was sour with insulation dust, and something bitter leaking from a cracked refrigeration unit somewhere aft. Every man inside the bunker was too dry-eyed to notice anymore. Vesh reached the console and keyed in his override. A retinal scan completed, reluctantly granting him access. The display pulsed amber, flickering through forgotten subdirectories tagged as Legacy Stack. On the other side of the chamber, Lieutenant Darn Halvek approached. Uniform crest from days of motionless sitting, jaw rigid with unspoken concern. He carried no weapon. It wouldn't have mattered in here, but his eyes tracked every motion on the display with growing unease. "You're tapping into an off-grid node that violates Accord Treaty Law under Code 4.219A. Direct Earth-linked comms without sanction." "Noted," Vesh replied. He didn't stop typing. "If we survive, you can log the infraction." Belvec paused. "What exactly do you think's going to hear us out there? Earth hasn't responded to frontier emergencies in decades. Doesn't need to be Earth. Just someone who remembers what Earth used to mean." That shut Halvek up. In the corner, another systems tech coughed. A sharp, involuntary rasp that echoed more than it should have in a room of metal corners and recycled air. No one spoke. The walls around them felt tighter with each passing minute, the psychological perimeter shrinking. For 36,000 colonists above ground, there were no more safe zones. The swarm had already breached 2 outer observation satellites and reduced 2 non-human settlements to pulverized shells. What little footage had been retrieved, heat scans, distorted feeds, showed hive tendrils moving like coordinated avalanches. No atmospheric crafts, no signals, just devouring motion. That wasn't war, that was system-level collapse. A chime sounded. Not loud, but different. Velen looked up from the rear deck with wide pupils. "Commander, it's responding." "Which node?" "Scarvex Relay 90, the Earthlink buoy." He moved without a word, joining Velen. The image on the upper viewport was a single pulse. 3 short bursts, then 1 long. The pattern was old, before Concord standardization. Before neural-synced communications, it meant acknowledgement. "Can you hear us?" Velen whispered. "No," Vesh said. "They registered us. We'll know if they heard us when something shows up." He turned and sat, not because he was tired, but because there was nothing else to be done now. The weight of compressed silence replaced the anxious machinery. Around them, the lights dimmed. as the system rerouted auxiliary power to keep the uplink steady. Outside the buried node, Arkin's reach stretched out across 1,200 kilometers of habitable Ark terrain. Biosynthed forests, vertical farmland, submerged cooling fields, all useless now. Emergency evacuation vessels could handle 8,000, maximum. Every remaining access corridor had been prioritized for civilian movement. Security teams were reassigned to traffic control and gate rotation. Every armored vehicle had been reconfigured for transport, not defense. It wasn't a strategy, it was documentation. They were preparing to die efficiently. On the wall mount display, Vesh watched the orbit feed loop one last time. The latest pass from drone Lancer 11 had caught the leading edge of the swarm. Organic mass expanding at orbital drift rates, riding their own generated gravitic pull. No engines, just purpose and vector. Vesh whispered, not to anyone in the room, but to the empty cold above. We are not your outpost, we are not your insurance loss. If we go, we do it broadcast. He stood again, walked to the microphone built into the relic communication deck. It hadn't been used in decades. The seal was still intact, the rubberized cap fused in place by time. He snapped it off with his gloved hand, peeled back the dust cover and leaned in. He said 5 words to Terran command. We remain. He didn't sign his name. He didn't declare authority. He didn't plead. Just signal, raw and uninterrupted, burning against the dark. It carried upward through 32 layers of rock, signal hopping through abandoned maintenance shafts lined with phase stabilizers, now reactivated. The uplink fed into the ancient buoy still orbiting above the northern pole. A relic that Earth never officially admitted installing. Whether or not Earth was listening wasn't the point anymore. He looked over his team. Darn Halvek had taken a seat. Velen hadn't stopped watching the signal strength bar. This wasn't a moment, it was a consequence. Above them, Arkin's atmosphere shimmered faintly pre-storm build. The ionosphere distorted at regular intervals, subtle flickers from magnetic field stress. A sign that planetary defense layers were thinning. The next solar pulse would likely burn out half the colony's exterior relays. In another 32 hours, the swarm would arrive. And if no one answered, then someone still remembered what Earth used to mean. Sir, unidentified contacts emerging from FTL scatterfields. Multiple signatures. Outer layer surveillance is folding under the counter. Rourke Vesh stood motionless. Not from fear, from calibration. His eyes locked onto the angular readout scraping live feed from the polar buoy's remaining visual sensors. The tactical display jittered, frame-locked for a half-second, then pushed the first real-time projection to the command wall. His breath caught before he realized it. 37 contacts. No, 74. 111. The relay staggered again. New targets updated. They were not formation-locked, not broadcasting alliance IFFs, not slipping in for diplomacy. They were arriving with coordinated orbital intent. Each flanked by deployment satellites, each descending on anchored burn trajectories. No 2 entry vectors were the same. Velen leaned forward over his console. That's not Alliance protocol. That's Terran entry scaffolding, multi-band gravity re-anchor. Vesh's voice cut clean. Overlay identification. Any call sends? The laser plasma display blinked twice. Then identifiers populated in red scribed font across the screen. UTD Palisade, UTD Farron's Wake, UTD Harbinger Apex. His throat tightened. That last one confirm it. Velen's hands flew across the pad. Registered under Earth Defense Command, D-Class Dreadnought, flagship designation active. Commander Rourke Vesh turned. Get me an exterior confirmation. Before Velen could respond, the feed updated again, this time from an old magnetic aperture cam near the western atmospheric curtain. What showed wasn't abstract. It wasn't pixels. The UTD Harbinger Apex punched through upper orbit like a hammer cracking ceramic. Its hull was jet-lined with ribbed reinforcement rings, plated unevenly in angled slabs. No aesthetics, no aerodynamic softening. Beneath its center spine, 5 rail lines stretched across the vessel's undercarriage, loaded, magnetized, cycling. Earth had come, but not to discuss terms. Vesh stepped away from the display. Send a static beacon. No alliance protocol, direct message only. Velen hesitated. What do I say? Request identification, no salutes, no qualifiers. The reply arrived less than 90 seconds later. No audio, just a packet string. You called us. We're here. Maintain lockdown. Transport incoming. That was it. Vesh didn't speak again until the outer sensors captured 4 escort-class cutters descending through atmosphere. A tight wedge formation. Each bristled with thermal shrouds and active ECM plates. Their descent was too steep for comfort, too deliberate to be diplomatic. He adjusted his jacket and pulled his collar tighter against the synthetic compression harness. I'll meet them outside. Halvek stepped forward. Commander, we don't have surface clearance, no welcome protocols, no treaty layer for this. Exactly why I'm going up. The cutter's rear gate unfolded with zero theatrics, just mechanical necessity. The interior was bare. No seat padding, no insignias, only functional restraints, sensor mesh built into the walls, and a single Terran soldier with reinforced gear and a head implant shaped like a neural anchor. He didn't speak until Vesh strapped in. You'll address Admiral Thorn directly. No intermediary, weapons aren't permitted, but your movements will be logged. I didn't bring a gun. Good, the soldier replied flatly. You won't need one. The liftoff pushed his spine into the rigging. Not violently, but decisively. The ascent wasn't smoothed by gravity dampeners or passenger comfort overrides. It was tuned for combat responsiveness. Every vibration transmitted through the frame, every shift in velocity logged directly through the seating conduit. It wasn't transport, it was relocation. The moment they breached upper orbit, the viewport darkened to filter solar scatter, revealing the flank of the Harbinger apex. The dreadnought didn't orbit, it hung. Like a statement carved from planetary history. 38 carrier vessels now matched trajectory behind it, all of them battle-capable, none of them shielded for retreat. No colony ships, no civilian lifters, no medevac tags. Earth hadn't come to ferry anyone away. They'd come to hold the ground. As the cutter docked against the Apex's armored shell, the airlock engaged with 2 redundant systems. Even before the door opened, Vesh caught the change in temperature. Cooler, not sterile, a clean mechanical cool, like the absence of decay. The first person he saw inside wore command rank, dark green command rig, tactical feed trailing on his right forearm, short cropped hair lined with 2 service scars beside his right eye. Admiral Thorn Corrin. He didn't offer a hand. You're Rourke Vesh, Arkan's acting command? I read your packet. You issued a Class E civilian distress through a buried boy. You knew it bypassed Concord protocol, which is why I sent it. Thorn nodded once. Good. That's why we answered. He gestured toward a narrow corridor that led deeper into the ship's operational core. Vesh followed. No gold-trimmed paths, no ceremonial flags. Just walls embedded with vertical conduits, pressure-sealed joints, and rotating feed monitors mapping real-time orbit saturation. Arkan has 36,000 colonists, mostly Accord-registered species. You know the swarm's path? Vesh exhaled. Every vector. I have 6 predictive models. None end in survival without planetary-level defense. You have it now. Thorn stopped mid-step. Not because of treaties. Not because of debt. Because we make it policy. If one Terran colony broadcasts threat, we assume the Alliance won't answer. And we move. Vesh didn't react outwardly, but his silence wasn't passive. It was confirmation. I'll want your threat scans, no filtering. We'll be deploying 5-fold coverage, orbital mines, interlinked mass driver rings, and ground-level spike arrays. No evac in motion, no extraction planned. You understand what that means? It means you're here to kill, not rescue. Thorne's jaw tightened, but he didn't correct the wording. Protocol 9 overrides all planetary interference clauses. The Accord may protest. Very already left us for dead. Then you understand, Thorne said, eyes narrowing. Outside the viewport to their left, one of the Terran corvettes reoriented its engine cluster to face downward. Its forward turrets were already active. The cannon heads glowed faintly. Cycling, dry, ready. The sky was no longer empty. And Arkin had no excuse left to wait. They're not coming in single vector lines. The swarm formation is split field. Variable altitude entry. That complicates your mean work. Tactical Officer Dren Malk didn't look up. He adjusted his gloved hand on the panel's control node and recalibrated the projection tilt manually. The laser plasma display floated over the main planning rail of the Harbinger apex. 6 overlapping layers of terrain, orbit, magnetic interference, and timing overlays, syncing in pulses. His eyes darted once, then landed again. I know, that's why we're not planting for proximity. We're rigging trigger spread arrays. Radiological masking tuned for heat and motion inertia. They'll detonate based on deceleration differentials. Marshal Tiv Holt stood across from him, jaw flexing. You're betting they'll slow during entry? No, Malk replied, adjusting the mesh plate's sensitivity filter. I'm betting some of them won't, and that's what sets off the chain. Behind them, the operations bay rattled briefly as a seismic spike shunted power to the orbital gun decks. None of the personnel inside flinched. Every member of Earth's 60 Surf had long since internalized battlefield turbulence. The entire ship was function before comfort. Tiv leaned closer to the train sweep. His armor was dust-caked from surface work. Even standing still, the polymer joints creaked from sand friction and unfiltered grit. We've got geothermal tunnels under District 5, still intact. If we tap the plates, route-controlled voltage spikes, we can shape a subsurface detonation. Malk nodded once. Set the first charge nodes there. Use shock triggers, not delay relays. If it starts, I want it to roll uphill, not down. Outside the viewport, Arkin's orbit was no longer untouched. Earth's cutters had deployed EM lattice buoys along 3 atmospheric paths. Stratosphere drones looping in coordinated spirals, each trailing thermoptic arrays tuned to scatter echo-legation frequencies. The swarm didn't use radar. They followed life signals, heat, water displacement, biological trace. Earth's solution? Mute everything. Then make the battlefield lie. Rail lines? Thorne's voice rang out as he entered from the rear threshold, datapad clenched behind his back. He didn't walk like a man seeking opinion. He moved like one verifying execution. Malk answered. Holt's teams are digging flechette beds along ingress trails. 4 on the western corridor. 6 more forming a grid around the planetary comp spike. Timeline? 10 hours, 12 if the bedrock shifts. Adjust the mag cutter's depth vector. I want no load-bearing terrain under the colony's primary structures. Swarm can't sense ground density shifts, but we're not losing habitat integrity before engagement. Holt's voice remained even. We can reinforce perimeter digouts with the drop core mesh you brought. Flexi steel spools still intact in Bay 4. Thorne nodded. Use them. I want no blind spots. No one was wasting words. This wasn't negotiation. This was geometry under pressure. Elsewhere on the ship, Dren knew, the second wave of mines were being programmed. Not for explosive radius, but for direction. Swarm ships relied on swarm logic. When attacked, they multiplied forward. Earth's plan: force them into artificial choke points, then detonate above their cluster heads, not beneath. Explain your 3-phase, Holt said without ceremony. My engineers know what they're building, but I want them to understand why. Malk tapped the panel, the central projection, reshaped into a simplified schematic. Phase 1. Orbital burnback. We detonate controlled antimatter pockets in pre-selected entry vectors. Not enough to stop them, just to slow and scatter. He shifted the display. Red lines exploded outward like threads pulled tight then snapped. Phase 2, Convergence Trap. As they recovered trajectory, they hit ground-based EM scatter nets. Sensory overload. That forces them low. Another adjustment. Topography changed. Kinetic mass drivers appeared, staged across hills, buried under camouflage structures. Each one aimed not at sky, but at corridor flight range. Here we hit 'em with hypervelocity slugs, shred the wings off their forward scouts. If any landers break through. He flicked once more. Flechette arrays, rail shock beds, and seismic detonation nodes appeared in a ripple. That's Phase 3, close contact infantry lag, high torch infantry, fortified choke points. We turn the terrain into the weapon. Thorne said nothing at first. Then, after a moment, "Your confidence in the terrain is noted." "It's not confidence," Mock replied. "It's math." The Admiral turned toward Holt. "Your crews. Running silent dig, no heavy equipment. Swarm might sense localized vibration if they've evolved past 6th-gen biological scanning. Use fluidic drills then, minimize harmonic bleed." Malk stepped away from the projection, walking over to the side bench where the surface field nodes were being calibrated. Behind him, Holt spoke again, quietly, more to himself. "Feels like we're preparing to shoot a planet out from under them." Malk didn't look up. "We're not shooting, we're shaping the response." He pressed a finger against the activation surface. The node sparked, then settled. "Ready for atmospheric deployment." "You know," Holt said, wiping sweat from the back of his hand onto a grit-streaked sleeve, "when I first saw the swarm eat a comm satellite from the inside out, I thought, there's no way you fight that. It doesn't react. It absorbs. You hit it. It multiplies." Malk rotated the field calibrator 30 degrees. "We're not fighting them. We're defining what happens when they cross a boundary." The projection flickered as the relay synchronized with the deployed lattices. Data pinged back from orbit, drone patterns locking into formation. The battlefield was almost ready, and Earth had no plans to meet the swarm halfway. They're pinging the outer markers, 3 pulses, 5-second spacing. No response, but they're not turning. Specialist Gavrik Solon leaned in, adjusting the focus array on the interface suite. His hands were steady, but his jaw tightened with every signal anomaly scrawling across the data slab. Behind him, 2 field techs rerouted auxiliary feed through a low-band encryption sync, trying to keep thermal signature leakage below swarm detection threshold. "You sure it's not residual feedback?" one asked. Solon didn't bother replying. He knew what residual looked like. This wasn't it. The signals weren't static distortions or magnetic echo. They had rhythm, controlled pacing, intent. The display etched another waveform. Short, long, short. Then pause. "What are they doing?" the second tech whispered. Solon keyed in a diagnostic overlay, his voice low and flat. "Mapping." The room wasn't dark, but it felt compressed, like the walls were listening. The soft stutter of power regulators faded as the signal scrubbers came online. Every system had been pushed below optimal operation to mask Arkan's footprint. Water cycling had been reduced. Atmospheric processors were throttled. Even the geothermal plants ran intermittent to keep biosignature bleed at a minimum. Solon stared at the pattern. "They're not probing our defenses. They're hunting temperature variance. No EM trace, just thermal differentiation." Outside, in upper orbit, the swarm fleet breached the outer marker grid. The initial wave had arrived as predicted. Vessels not so much piloted as directed. Organic hulls, joint-layered exoskeletal mass, no engines. They moved with gravitational alignment, leveraging system drift to ride inbound vectors. But the path wasn't clean. Earth's decoy buoys had been positioned along 3 trajectory forks, each emitting Arkan's biosignature, spliced with randomized colony SIPE signals scraped from atmospheric logs. They weren't just lures. They were layered noise. Solon switched to the heads-up display linked to the perimeter drones. Red icons blinked out of sequence as the first swarm scouts broke formation. They're ignoring the eastern fork, he muttered. They're curving to quadrant 6. That's one of the decoy lanes. Thorne's voice came through the internal channel, clipped and direct. Observations? Solon spoke without turning. Swarm is following heat gradient patterns, not energy outputs. They're reading ecosystem recovery rates. The moment we let the thermal balance drop, they knew which regions were synthetic. In conclusion, Solon tapped the screen. They're learning. First contact wasn't behavioral, it was computational. They're not just sensing, they're analyzing. Silence. Then Thorne. Initiate early activation. Malk's voice came through immediately from the forward station. Too early. Minds aren't full synced yet. We won't wait for sync. Malk didn't argue again. In quadrant 6, the decoy trail terminated at a field of dormant mines. Shaped explosives, wired for directional fragmentation, rigged to rupture inward and force atmospheric compression. The detonation matrix hadn't fully primed, but delay risked detection. Solon keyed in the override and spoke into the mic. Activating Cluster 17, sending dummy signal to Barry source tag. Outside, space blinked. No flash, no thunder, just data spikes. 9 points, vanished from the feed, wiped clean. The blast signature didn't register on standard EM. Only gravitational lensing confirmed the detonation. Then a ripple. The swarm paused. For less than 2 seconds, their forward movement stopped. Solon felt the hair on his arms stand. Till he recognized the shape of the reaction. They've encountered this before. No chance, one of the techs said. No one's used directional mine traps in open space in 30 years. Very vemplay, now, Solon replied. The swarm reorganized, not backward, not outward, but downward. Their formation shifted toward planetary approach vectors, as if retreat had never occurred to them. The mining detonation hadn't deterred them. It had refined their targeting algorithm. We pushed them out of pattern, Solon muttered, watching the swarm stretch like fluid under tension. They're adapting in real time. Outside Arkan's upper orbit, Earth's fleet didn't flinch. The minefield across the lower hemisphere remained quiet, its charges still armed but dormant. The dreadnoughts held position behind thermal dampeners, tracking swarm acceleration through silent feeds. Solon closed the diagnostic and opened a second channel. Confirm the entry curve. If they're falling below 80K altitude, we need to reroute ground-based power. The masking nets won't hold at vertical descent. The feed jittered, then Holt's voice came through. Confirmed. Descent angle tightening. We'll push coolant discharge into atmospheric spread. Might simulate biodecay. Do it, and deploy the second drone set. We need artificial thermal scatter across zones 4 through 8. Holt replied without flair. Understood. In orbit, the swarm shifted again, their lead edge blurred. Not visually, but in frequency. The pulse-based signals began to spread laterally, across multiple vectors. They were mapping interference, identifying mismatched terrain outputs. They're broadcasting countermasks, Solon said aloud. They're probing noise fields with targeted pressure zones. That's not instinct. That's adjustment. One of the techs asked what everyone was thinking. Can we still pull this off? Solon didn't answer. He just watched the central cluster of the swarm fleet change formation once more, narrowing toward a single thermal corridor. And directly below it, under kilometers of dust and rock, sat Arkan's fusion hub. He keyed the override again. Sending false cascade. Let's see if they're smart enough to follow the wrong trail twice. Above them, silent warfare had begun. No explosions, no declarations. Just thermal whispers and sensor lies. And the swarm, relentless, advanced toward the only real light left burning. Target density too high, they're skipping detonation zones and shifting inward. Recommend immediate escalation to second stage mass drivers. Tactical Officer Dren Malk's voice cracked through the bridge relay, carrying none of the technical comm he usually wore like armor. On the command deck of the Harbinger Apex, the heads-up display stuttered under the weight of real-time threat vectors. Every second, more swarm contacts pushed into Arkan's thermosphere, bypassing kill corridors with disturbing irregularity. Confirm kill rate, Admiral Thorne ordered. Malk's fingers danced over the input pad, the pressure-sensitive console translating each micro-movement to angular fire patterns across the upper screen. 22% neutralized, that's it. Below them, the minefield had gone active. Plasma-threaded fragmentation rounds detonated in layered arcs. Swarm clusters vanished into scorched vacuum, but for each formation lost, 2 more reformed, converging along altered routes. Their logic was changing. Adaptation wasn't reaction, it was reformulation. Each strike taught them what to avoid. Thorne stared at the readout without blinking. Proceed with mass driver solution. Priority sectors. Delta 7 through Gamma 9. Already feeding the guidance mesh. Far beneath orbit, the colony perimeter shook as the first driver launched. The recoil wasn't seismic, but kinetic feedback transferred into the soil in a way that felt like the Earth was retching. Steel-piercing payloads ripped through low orbit and lanced into the incoming swarm waves. Contact registered immediately. Dense hulls split. Black ichor exploded outward, and several warforms broke formation mid-fall. Commander Rourke Vesh stood in the observation tier of Node 2. His hand braced against the reinforced glass as the sky above lit with tracking vectors and contrail bursts. Pull the next barrage south, he ordered. They're dipping below the hill line near Junction 7. Already moving the arrays. Came the reply from the forward operator. Keep them high. We're targeting descent, not impact. Another kinetic shell screamed skyward. This time the targeting was off by seconds. The projectile missed the swarm drop by 400 meters and slammed into an unshielded agricultural district. A firestorm followed, bright and ugly. The explosion punching dirt columns into the air like a reverse meteor strike. Reports streamed in. 9 dead, 33 injured. Civilian shelter integrity compromised. Vesh turned away from the glass. Put me through to Thorne. The connection clicked open. I'm not taking civilian complaints right now, Thorne said before Vesh could speak. That was a colony block. People knew evacuation wasn't happening. We promised perimeter safety. No, you did. I promised them we'd hold the line. That means all routes, even if it breaks your zoning models. Vesh's tone dropped. They're calling us executioners. Thorne's pause was brief. Then, they finally understand what the swarm does to hope. We're not here to reassure anyone. We're here to stop dismemberment in real time. The channel cut. Vesh didn't speak for a moment. The room around him pulsed with the low vibration of another launch cycle beginning. The floor beneath his boots trembled, not from panic, but from strategy at scale. He turned and crossed the floor toward the side deck, where Malk was now reprogramming firepath algorithms by hand. For bleeding munitions. Malk didn't look up. Tonnage is down, 28%. Driver payloads are being burned faster than the feeders can reload. Go back? Malk hit a sequence. The display updated. Fletchet grids. Local airburst charges wired to delay fuses. It's old tech, cheap. It'll maim, not much more. I've viewed it. They're already planting. Tiv's teams are rigging rooftops and trench lines. Vesh exhaled through his teeth. You think this is still defense? His hand paused. No. It's classification now. Defense means you intend to live. This is control over collapse. Down in Sector 4, sirens began to spin as secondary shelter seals failed. A breach in the west conduit line forced evac teams to redirect traffic across open terrain. They'd be exposed if another swarm cluster descended unannounced. Vesh's command tab buzzed. Thorne's voice again. Reroute all remaining colony traffic. Prioritize internal circuitry. No external movement unless it feeds battle logistics. We have injured, and if they reach the gate line, we'll have bodies to pile. Vesh didn't answer. Thorne's voice dropped. This is deterrence, not diplomacy. The line went dead. Malk finished setting the fallback sequence. If the third wave arrives early, we won't hold. Then we shorten the approach, Vesh replied. Force them into choke zones and light the whole grid. There'll be nothing left of the surface if we do that. Better than watching it rot from the inside. Outside the shielded glass, another mass Dister volley detonated in upper atmosphere. The sky split. Briefly, and fragments of swarm hull rained like slag obsidian across the outer districts. Malk looked up from the screen. We can buy 20 more minutes of suppression. Besh glanced toward the west, where a trail of evac transports sat immobile. Power drained, doors sealed, passengers still inside. That 20 is all we get. The battlefield wasn't measured in lines, it was mapped by choices. And every one cost more than the one before. They've breached outer sectors. Sector 8 just lost all biometric feed. Impact pattern confirms ground assault. Marshal Tib Holt didn't wait for the rest. He dropped his neural sync into active mode and triggered his armor's overdrive sequence. Joints hissed, servos locked, and reinforced plates sealed around his ribs as the back ridge surged heat from its primary coil. The readout blinked green. Fully armed, fully tethered, zero margin for error. He stepped onto the lift pad with 2 squads behind him, each soldier locked into combat harnesses built for torque, not finesse. Earth's infantry didn't win wars with speed. They ground the enemy out of space and air with inertia. Zone 3 through 6 are under pressure. Movement patterns suggest vertical collapse into tunnels, the operator called from the overhead. Don't wait for routing, Holt barked. We drop where the contact is thickest. The lift screamed downward. Inside, no one spoke. The sound wasn't noise. It was weight shifting through reinforced magnetics. The kind of descent that didn't offer time for reflection, only readiness. The second the hatch opened, heat smashed into them. Not dry, not volcanic. This was moist and sour. Organic residue in the wind mixed with crumbled polymers and scorched stone. Holt's HUD lit with impact trajectories, swarm biosigns, and 36 hazard vectors. All of them live. The first swarm vessel had cratered at the edge of a loading depot near Supply Wing 18. It hadn't landed. It had embedded. Its hull still twitched, like muscle under nerve trauma. From its split carapace, things crawled. Limbs clicking in rhythm, appendages sharp and jointed. Not armor, not shell, exposed weaponry grown like teeth. Engage. Holt's order didn't rise in volume, it narrowed. His squad peeled off into formation, stepping over broken ground and shattered walkways, with boots designed to carry full impact force into combat torsion. The nearest swarm unit shrieked, not through vocal cords, but a chemical psionic burst that ruptured half the squad's comm relay. Holt's internal feed stuttered, reset, then flashed red. EM interference, escalating. Switch to hand sign fallback. Came a relay from Sergeant Calm behind him. Already done. Holt lifted his left fist, pivoted forward, and fired point blank into the swarm's chest line. The impact didn't knock it back. It caved it inward. The armor-piercing round tore through organic plating and ruptured whatever counted as a vascular core. The creature folded silently. From the second breach zone, a detonation sent gravel and limbs flying in every direction. Ors Varen stumbled sideways, one shoulder torn open by a near miss from a swarm appendage shaped like a saw blade with muscle behind it. Status? Holt shouted, dragging him behind a partial wall. Laren's skin was pale. Still walking. Just leaking faster than usual. You can still hold that line? Don't ask. Just point me. Holt hauled him up and shoved him toward a breach corridor. Tunnel 11. If they collapse that, they'll push under the habitat columns. Behind them, another wave crashed forward. The swarm had stopped moving in single pulses. They were advancing node to node, shifting formations to flank the nearest combat vectors. Holt's neural overlay updated, and for the first time, swarm patterns no longer matched centralized tactics. They weren't taking orders from one hive. They were dividing tasks independently. He opened a new channel. Command, this is Holt. Enemy is adapting. Pattern data no longer consistent, they're improvising. Vesh's voice cut in. We're seeing it too, redirecting thermal power through Sector 5 conduits. You'll have coolant venting through tunnels in 30 seconds. Understood. I'll hold them in the trench. He turned to his right squad. Full hold position. Line them up. Plasma coolant poured from ceiling ducts a moment later. No warning, no hiss. Just white vapor flooding the corridor like a liquefied scream. The swarm inside reacted instantly. Coils buckled, limbs contracted violently. Chemical structures didn't resist heat. They melted. One lurched forward, limbs sagging, then collapsed in a puddle of dissolved tendon. More followed. And behind them, new ones, still dry, still lethal. Holt signaled the fallback node. 3-second pulse, he warned, then slammed the activation pad. The local rail grid flared. Electrified. Not for deterrence, for neutralization. The swarm's body count multiplied. The trench became a killing box. Then the power surged. A misfeed somewhere upstream overloaded the coupling, and the light snapped out. Back to manual, Holt yelled. No HUDs, no overlays. Just breath, pain, and the sound of bones cracking. Yours or theirs, you didn't stop to ask. He drew his backup blade. No edge, just weighted force. It broke whatever it hit, and he kept hitting. Because anything that still moved wasn't human. Not tonight. You've broken into upper vector 3, rear flanks peeling toward Moonshadow. If we wait another minute, we lose crossfield coverage. Admiral Thorne Corrin stood inside the command ring of the Harbinger Apex, both hands locked behind his back. The heads-up display surrounding the circular platform scrolled updated threat trajectories, fleet sync reports, and detonation readiness indexes across 3 orbital layers. Every red line creeping closer to the colony wasn't theoretical. It was already consuming sky. Time to position? He asked, his tone flat. Converted freighters are locked, replied Commander Jarek Fawn from the tactical node. 28 in grid pattern, radius anchor engaged. Reactor cords are in hardened sync. Any pulse now will cascade through all cells in under 6 seconds. Drin Malk entered from the access corridor, his expression carrying more than urgency. It carried refusal. He made it halfway to Thorne before speaking. You deploy this and you fracture the magnetic belts for the entire hemisphere. You're talking decades of atmospheric destabilization. Thorne didn't turn. And if we don't, we hand the swarm uncontested orbital superiority. There are 32,000 still on the surface. You ignite those freighters, they'll survive. But everything above them will cycle into ionic chaos. No crop regrowth, no climate control, no clean shielding for the next generation. The next generation doesn't happen if we let them breach the lower orbit, Thorne said, sharper now. This isn't a debate. You could have rigged them with layered pulse dispersion and given them the chance to adapt mid-burst? No. Malk stepped forward. At least detonate over the southern field. Keep the overburn away from the geothermal grids. Thorne finally looked at him. The swarm's reinforcement fleet is redirecting around that field. We detonate off target, we lose impact depth. They'll push past the grid and into low orbit within 40 seconds. They'll retreat if we hold them with sustained fire. We don't have sustained fire left, Thorne snapped. The room froze. He exhaled once and turned back to the activation station. His voice dropped. Mass drivers are dry, orbital slugs spent, surface batteries are rerouting grid power just to cycle targeting. This isn't sustained. This is what we have. Malk didn't speak again. Thorne moved to the manual detonation panel. No remote control, no AI sequencing. This was set up to require human input from within the combat rail. He keyed in his command string. Directive Harroglass confirmed, the console announced. All freighter cores aligned, countdown locked to uncommand detonation. Thorne looked once more at the orbital sweep. The swarm was folding inward, not retreating, coiling, preparing a mass push toward the colony while its surviving scouts probed the weakening flank. He opened a direct channel to Arkan's surface. Vesh, you have 60 seconds. Inform the shelters. They're about to lose satellite feed, atmospheric tracking, and any long-range comms. Vesh didn't ask why. He only replied, "Understood." Thorn closed the link. He turned toward Fallon. "Activate." The command bridge darkened, not from system failure, but as a safety measure. Ion field barriers rotated into position. Viewports sealed. Heads-up displays turned red. One freighter blinked out of existence. Then 27 more followed, almost simultaneously. There was no explosion in the traditional sense. No fireball. Just a rupture of light that tore into orbit with blinding ferocity, stripping charge layers from the surrounding atmosphere and inducing a system-wide ionic shockwave. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then sensors began to return. Swarm vessels shattered. Hulls ruptured in sequence. Those not directly vaporized spun uncontrolled, biosystems failing under electrical overload. Clusters collapsed like disabled tendons. The push stopped. Back on the surface, weather systems screamed. Power relays shorted, relay drones dropped offline, but the colony core held. It wasn't untouched, but it still breathed. Malk turned away from the display. "You just destabilized a planet to win a single battle." Thorn answered without hesitation. "I'd fracture 10 to stop extinction." Silence lingered between them as the remains of the swarm drifted dead above Arkan. The ion storm that followed wasn't quiet, but it was victorious. "They've arrived, too clean, too late," said Lieutenant Halvek as he stood at the edge of the control platform, visor reflecting the gleam of the Accord envoy vessel sliding into low orbit. Commander Rourke Vesh didn't acknowledge the remark. His attention remained on the heads-up display stitched into the mobile relay rig mounted over the trench. Scans confirmed it. The swarm remnants had withdrawn beyond Arkan's influence range. The outer system still flickered with drifting fragments, but no coordinated signals. Whatever remained of the hive had recognized what stood in its path, and it hadn't tried again. "Transmission from the Accord flagship requesting planetary entry," Halvek added after a long pause. "Deny it. Earth holds jurisdiction," Vesh replied. Halvek tapped the panel. "Flag response?" Vesh looked toward the orbital spine now being constructed above Arkan's mid-latitudes. Twin gun plates already rotated slowly in alignment, fed by frame extensions that would, in time, form a permanent defense grid. The construction crews didn't wait for permits. They never had. Tell them we're not a debate forum anymore. From orbit, Earth's beacon pulsed, a system-wide declaration encoded in military-grade frequency tiers. A relay not open to diplomatic delay. The message was 9 words long. "We hold. We don't wait for votes anymore. No embellishment, no anthem. Just fact." Vesh descended into the old trench line, boots grinding over fused rubble and the remains of what had once been a perimeter wall. Ash and carbon dust clung to every surface. Steel, warped from thermal rippling, ran like veins through the slope. He passed a melted support strut where Ors Varen's squad had held the tunnel choke. A jagged hunk of coolant pipe jutted from the concrete slab nearby, blown outward during the fallback detonation. There were no memorials. No silence. Just movement. Earth engineers rotated through shifts, rebuilding the trench network into hardened corridor lines. Their suits didn't shine. Their tools didn't announce themselves, but the work progressed. Methodical, unstoppable. He stopped beside a collapsed swarm drone, half its body vitrified from proximity blast damage. The outer limb coils had fused into a solid mass. In one of its claws, fused in tension, was a fragment of Arkan soil. Bust still crumbled, still held. "Even dead, they wanted to take something," Vesh muttered. "Not much left for them now," said Admiral Thorn's voice from behind. Vesh turned. Thorn stood without escort, no guards, no ceremony. His uniform was scorched at one shoulder, the mark of where a blast panel had split near the forward deck hours before. He didn't seem concerned. "I hear the Accord's upset," Thorn said. "Maybe expected us to fold or burn. We did neither. They'll petition for oversight. Let them." Thorn's eyes moved to the construction line above, By the time they finish their first vote, we'll have 6 orbital batteries armed and ready. They'll say Earth overstepped. We didn't step, we landed. Vesh allowed himself a shallow nod. Then, when did you know the freighters were necessary? When I read their heat cycle behavior. They weren't rushing. They were coordinating flank reinforcement. You don't reinforce unless you expect to keep territory. We made sure they didn't. Malk joined them moments later, data unit clipped to his belt, his face expressionless. Permanent environmental readings are coming in. We'll need to restabilize the ionosphere every 12 cycles until the belts repair themselves. Can it be done? Hard, but survivable. Thorn gestured toward the horizon. Build around the wounds. Don't hide them. Malk nodded and walked off without reply. Vesh remained by the wreckage. His voice dropped to something colder. Next time they'll expect it. They'll adjust. Then we'll show them how humans adjust harder. You ever think we're teaching the swarm how to fight smarter? Invaders already knew how to consume, Thorn answered. Now they know what happens when you meet something that doesn't let itself be consumed. Above them, the Accord ship sent another request. It was ignored. Within 3 days, Arkan's Reach officially amended its charter. It no longer operated under Accord security jurisdiction. All planetary defense protocols were rerouted through Earth's Strategic Command. The declaration passed unanimously. The Accord's representative never got clearance to land. On the 6th day, a final relay was sent. Open band, uncoded. To all listening systems, the swarm tested our silence. It found something waiting. The SOS reached Deathworlders. They didn't send aid. They sent a fleet. There were no further broadcasts after that. Only the sound of orbital stabilizers anchoring the sky.